So, it would appear dinosaurs are relevant again. You know what that means. Boom, boom, akka-laka-laka, boom, 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 akka-laka, boom. If you were a child growing up in the 90s, chances are you've been figuratively stampeded on by the collective dinosaur mania that overtook popular culture somewhere in between The Land Before Time, Jurassic Park, and Extreme Dinosaurs. Yes, that needed to be mentioned, apparently. There was never a moment in mediatic history in which those lovely extinct feathery reptiles, thanks a lot science, happened to be a big part of our imagination as they were in that particular period of time. The dino craze expanded over television, music, video games, merchandise, Weird Al's claymation world, and so on. As for cinema, it's actually a much longer story. Those prehistoric prancers had been part of the now extinct celluloid film since time immemoria, which is to say, the very beginning of the medium itself. 1925's The Lost World presented a then impressive slew of stop-motion animated dinosaurs, as well as 1933's King Kong. Special effects genius Ray Harryhausen built his entire career out of animating clay monsters, most of which were in fact dinosaurs. And again, there's Fantasia, The Beast from a 20,000 Fathoms, Gojira! Daffy Duck and the Dinosaur. I could go on forever. Instead, I'll get to the point now. Ideally, this was all possible thanks to a film made all the way back in 1914. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Gertie! Yes, her name is Gertie. Presenting Winsor McCay, America's greatest cartoonist, according to himself. A prolific artist most notably remembered for his Little Nemo comic strip, detailing the escapades of a child in the world of Slumberland, which he could only access through his dreams, thus leaving into ambiguity whether it was literally another world or the product of his subconscious wonders and fears. This was one of those fundamental milestones in modern storytelling, whose influence is so deeply ingrained in our collective mindset that it keeps popping out in the most unsuspecting places, partly because McKay's creation is the forefather of the whole fantasy coming-of-age genre, but mostly because I really wanted an excuse to reference one of my most favorite games of all time. Oh yes, I am totally eluding the idea that Klonoa is a modern-day equivalent of Nemo. He is called the Dream Traveler after all, which also gave the name to my old video game show. Self-promotion. Back to topic, McKay was already a big name in the then flourishing funny papers industry with his most famous creation. But that wasn't enough now, was it? He wanted more! He wanted to bring his work to life! And so he did. Albeit not the first artist to ever experiment with the medium of animation, Winsor is pretty much the reason why cartoons eventually became animated cartoons, aka what we commonly refer to as cartoons nowadays. Gertie the Dinosaur was arguably the first animated cartoon to focus on a specific character from which to build a story around. I say arguably, in quotation marks, because, sadly, the vast majority of films made in the early 20th century are irremediably lost due to the lack of a proper archive or a means of preservation that, logically speaking, could not have existed back then. Therefore, when I stated that Gertie the Dinosaur was arguably the first animation of its kind, I really meant to say it was the first of its kind that we know of. Speaking of first times, this film wasn't even fully a cartoon. It alternated between live-action footage of Winsor McCay and his real-life cartoonist friends eating at a restaurant, and the dinosaur herself timidly coming to life in the panels set by McCay in said restaurant. So yes, this film was arguably also the first one to mix live action with traditional animation, paving the way for such pillars of the medium such as the Fleischer Brothers, which would actually include cartoons inside live action scenes, Disney and iWorks' earliest work, the Alice comedies, which brought a real person inside the cartoon, and of course everything else you know and love that was made with this mixed technique. The premise is as follows. Winsor McCay bets his friend and fellow cartoonist George McManus at dinner for the whole party that he can make the dinosaurs live again by a series of hand-drawn cartoons. Hence the reason this is taking place in a fancy restaurant. The rest of the film showcases said animated dinosaurs, a Brontosaurus to be specific, or a Brachiosaurus, or however scientists want to call it, following her master's every command like a circus act. An analogy that fits rather well with the wow factor of the medium at the time. Before it became an established art form or an industry, cinema was much like the circus, in that its novelty was used to impress people. You could say that in a very subtle metatextual way. Gertie the Dinosaur was a self-aware novelty show within the novelty show that was cinema. At the end of the demonstration, McKay inserts himself in Gertie's own world to put an exclamation point to his entire act. Afterwards, George McManus paid up the party's dinner, and that's that. There are two known versions of this short film, both easy to find online. A 5 minutes long one that only covers the dinner demonstration sequence that I just described, and a longer one about 14 minutes in length. This version provides an expanded backstory for the bet between McKay and McManus, which was inspired by a trip to the Museum of Natural History, as well as an interesting behind-the-scenes sequence showcasing the sheer amount of work that it took to animate Gertie. We are talking about 10,000 hand-drawn frames on sheets made of rice paper. I want you to think about that for a moment because that's how you made cartoons back then. Needless to say, I recommend to watch this version since it tells the complete story. Now, here's a little piece of information that will blow your mind. The live-action segments of this film were added after the animated portion. That's because the act you saw McKay perform in front of his friends was the same act he used to perform in front of an actual live audience. That's right, Gertie the Dinosaur was a real-life circus act. A vaudeville act to be precise, but you get the idea. He would order his creature to do certain tricks, and the animated dinosaur on the big screen would do as it was commanded. Obviously, it was the same set of orders every time, because she was not really there, but nonetheless, this was an impressive feat for the time. So yes, I can believe he's America's greatest cartoonist. Not only was he a central figure in the upbringing of the then young animation medium, but he's pretty much the reason why audiences fell in love with dinosaurs to begin with. In fact, come to think of it, this man was an eccentric, wealthy person obsessed with prehistoric monsters that succeeded in bringing them back to life through his own means in order to wow people. Winsor McCay was the original John Hammond. Oops, I broke the internet. Again.
So I those things? Are those the queen's babies?
Oh, you mean the flying heads with teeth trying to eat my face? I don't know, Drone. Why don't you stop and ask them yourself? That was easy.
Oh, I'm sorry. You want to know what Akumi is, right? Yes, of course you want to. I mean, this is technically a video about it, so I should probably talk about it, shouldn't I? I guess a better question you should be posing yourself is, how exactly do I know about Akumi? Well then, I remember the first time I fumbled upon Akumi some years ago. Well, to be more specific, I fumbled upon a certain scene, a very specific scene from Akumi. Oh yes. Created in 2006 by the duo of Milton Poole and Dave Johnson of Miltonius Arts and distributed on the web under the banner of Primal Instinct Productions, the original 40 minutes long worth of Flash animated shorts was later took down because of their extreme content. The kind of extreme content that finds itself uploaded in porn websites, apparently, which means the only versions that are currently publicly available on YouTube have been slightly re-edited and censored in order to make them, well, less extreme. Honestly, the show is better for it. It would be otherwise pretty hard to take this series as anything more than just blatant exploitation, when it just happened to feature a rape scene in which the victim gets showcased in various camera angles. I am not going to show it to you! You know why! Akumi, subtitled Conspiracy and Capture, tells the space bounty hunting adventures of a space bounty huntress by the name of Akumi and her bounty hunting drone sidekick by the name of Drone, which happen in space! Oh, and there's also magic. She likes strutting around wearing nothing more than a bikini and a Star-Lord jacket.
Oh, are we having a beach party? Because that's what you dress like. You're wearing a bikini. You're the mayor of Crazy Town. That's nice. Looks good.
After winning the elections, the mayor of Crazy Town gets in a crazy bounty hunt that lasts about 3 episodes, out of a total of 4. It should be mentioned that she only makes her first appearance in the second episode of the series. The first one is completely dedicated to the introduction of the main villains, which are not going to have anything to do in the rest of the story because it was never finished. More on that later. So, here's how Akumi, Conspiracy and Capture, actually begins. And just like that, I'm reminded of Dragon Pink. I guess that's one way to get the juicy fairy nectar. Whoa, dude! This is Roncha, an evil space warlock, person bent on galaxy conquest, as evil space warlocks are wont to do. He's got an endless harem of cloned women and a pair of zombie sisters as his personal lackeys. Again, space warlock. He plans on unlocking some non-specific ultimate power by stealing a bunch of mystical artifacts, plus kidnapping a young girl to use as a ritualistic sacrifice, and this whole plot is starting to sound like every hentai porn ever made. Seriously, we already have sexual assault and a scantily clothed main character who gets either harassed or made fun of on a regular basis. All that's missing at this point are hermaphrodite women and tentacle monsters. Speaking of rape monsters, let's finally address the uncomfortable elephant in the room, shall we? The scene you will no longer be able to see outside of pornographic websites involves an overpowered terrorist with cybernetic implants by the name of, I kid you not, Lester the Molester, and a very unfortunate guardswoman who was just doing her job. I'll let you figure out for yourself who gets to be the victim in this equation. Get over here! Please take all the time you need to groan inwardly. Are you done? Okay, let's continue. Polyester the Molester attacks a cloning facility that belongs to Roncha the Evil Warlock in order to steal its energy for himself, which is a development that never directly connects with anything else going on, and it feels entirely coincidental, really. Anyway, our space bounty hunting heroine, in case you forgot this is her story, goes after the guy. Unfortunately, she doesn't quite make it in time to save the guard's woman. Like and subscribe! After a relatively well-animated fight scene for 2006, Akumi proceeds to slash the guy's leg off out of retribution, which leads to getting herself cheated out the full bounty since he was wanted alive and intact. But at the very least, she gets the guardswoman's gratitude.
Thank you.
Let's move out.
And that's all. There really isn't much to say about this original web cartoon. It was clearly a passion project made by people who watched too much anime growing up. The kind of anime fated to be torn apart by internet critics who made a career out of it. The science fantasy setting isn't particularly expanded upon due to time constraints, but on the plus side, the aesthetics seem to be very reminiscent of Jamie Hewlett's art style, something that I can very much appreciate. It's hard to say if this story will ever see a conclusion. A supplementary 5th episode was recently released that doesn't advance the narrative by much. Also, Miltonius Arts is currently focusing its efforts in the making of a prequel series by the title of Akumi Extreme, which tells the bumbling bounty hunting origins of our heroine when she used to be much more of a klutz and much less of a no-nonsense kind of gal that still wears nothing but a bikini and a Star-Lord jacket. Because why not? I'm the mayor of Crazy Town. See you at the beach party, bros! Woohoo! Hashtag Bikini Bottom! It's autumn. Before narwhals.
Narwhals swimming in the ocean, causing a commotion, 'cause they are so awesome.
Before salad fingers.
Hello. I like rusty spoons.
Before the ultimate showdown of Ultimate Destiny.
The ultimate showdown, ultimate destiny, good guys, bad guys, and explosions, as far as the eye can see.
She was there. If there there is such a thing as an internet-based culture and therefore an obligatory element of nostalgia attached to it, the Newgrounds website represents one of its undeniable pillar stones. You see, back in the primordial days of the 2000s internet landscape preceding the rise of a certain beloved video sharing platform, Tom Phelps' Newgrounds.com was the go-to place for would-be talented independent animators and video game designers to show off their abilities and leave their mark in the then young but ever-growing online communities built around said media, only to eventually become the foundations of the indie market as a whole, and that's especially true for game developers. The site was a starting point for pretty much every big-time internet-famed animator you can think of, such as Igoraptor, Mr. Weeble, David Firth, Ross O'Donovan, Max Gilardi, and whoever made this.
You want this game?
I want it.
You want this game?
I want it.
You want this game?
I want it.
You want
that game?
It's in this kind of creative and supportive environment of tight, passion-driven groups that a little South Korean animated series found a home. And the internet would never, ever be the same again. That needed to be done. There She Is was created by a Free People team known as Sambakza Works. The original short was made over a decade ago and was originally hosted in the creator's homepage, before finding American and international notoriety with its Newgrounds debut. The entire series was comprised of 5 episodes, released in between 2003 and 2008, each structured like an animated music video about 4 minutes long, 7 minutes for the last one. The manhwa style of the animation lends itself well for both perfectly timed comedic slapstick moments and for conveying feelings and characters' reactions in an unmistakably direct way. Its simple, cute-looking aesthetics are particularly valorized in the juxtaposition of some of the series' darkest points and the portrayal of certain social issues. Because yes, this non-Japanese comical furry rom-com anime show that makes weeaboos go kawaii and everyone else go "Daww" is about diversity, interracial relationships, and the real-life civil fights attached to them. And it's also possibly the most adorable thing in the whole bloody universe, and if you don't agree with me, you're a heartless bastard that eats barf, and the world is better with no of you! The nostalgia is strong with this one. Meet Doki, an animal-loving, cute-as-buttons bunny girl that's also a stalking psychopath who doesn't take no for an answer. Meet Nabi, an everyday cat guy who lives in constant terror and fear as his life gets systematically destroyed by one crazy rabbit who went full-on yandere for him because of love. After essentially chasing him for the entire duration of the first short, the poor kitten has no other choice but to surrender to her unwanted affections, effectively dooming his existence to perpetual conjugal hell. Then they exchange fish and carrot flavored coffee together and everything is now super duper. Do people still say super duper? I don't know what I'm doing here. I just don't. To be fair, the cartoon is smart enough to immediately contextualize said one-sided romance within the leitmotif of the entire diegesis, namely the fact that interspecies relationships between cat and rabbit people, while not illegal, are generally considered a taboo, hence the aforementioned social commentary that's imbued in the story. In that sense, the reason why Nabi was not at first particularly inclined in dating Doki had less to do with him not fancying her, and more to do with his personal fretting over the very idea of overstepping the boundaries imposed by the powers that be, which is as typical as a starting point for every main character of this kind of fight the establishment because of love story. It's especially satisfying to witness Nabi's growth from being an unassuming, socially conscious individual to the sort of guy that would sacrifice everything for the one he wants to be with, which still doesn't quite justify Doki's borderline restriction order Twitter-worthy stalking behavior. However, even if this invasion of personal spaces could have potentially undermined the legitimacy of its themes, that's really the only issue I can find here. Sure, maybe the commentary itself can be rather bare bones and overly simplistic at times, if not downright corny when it gets inevitably superseded by the power of love, essentially saving the day. Oh, South Korea. But if I have to be honest, I'd say that's part of the everlasting and yes, even timeless charm of this series. There are many animations and cartoons we have nostalgic feelings about that, as adults, we are able to rationally recognize to be not as good as we thought they were. There She Is, in my opinion, is something that openly defies this very notion. It's a raw emotional journey that thrives in its poetically unpolished style, in its simple, innocent, childish visuals overlapping the real-life issues allegorized throughout its 5 episodes. It is not a nostalgic show. It is a show that defines nostalgia, with its cute animation and its tonally appropriate original compositions perfectly placed over it. It's ultimately a warm, fuzzy feel-good cartoon that makes your heart smile and weep every time you watch it, whether it's 2003 or right now. Speaking of which, right now seems like a good time to catch up with the series, and here's why. That's right, There She Is coming back with a new episode. I have only one thing to say to that. When it comes to TV-provided entertainment, I tend to be a son of the 90s. Disney's and Warner Bros., Cartoon Renaissance, Sam Raimi's produced serials, and the occasional schlock of extreme proportions. These were my weekly media consumptions growing up in the decade of corn dogs, Hammer time pants, and the influx of universal uncertainties and geopolitical chaos brought upon by the end of the Cold War, which relegated the last 10 years of the past millennium in a state of existential emptiness associated with a worrying lack of cultural substance. So anyway, the 1980s. My occasional foray into the media offerings of the decade that first monetized the concept of nostalgia mostly consists on shows like DuckTales, various anime that were imported at the time, and occasionally something like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe would pop up in my radar. And speaking of cheaply made toy commercials with high-concept science fantasy settings but less than stellar execution, let's talk about a semi-forgotten cartoon that may very well be considered a prototypical He-Man in terms of both presentation and budget. It's called
Thundarr the Barbarian!
Yes, that. After miraculously surviving the terror of the attack of the Scooby clones, also known as the 70s, the American animation industry was about to just keel over and die, What would ultimately save it from its economical demise, ironically, was the concept of turning cartoons into glorified infomercials for associated toys, a trend that became actuable during the Reagan administration. Unfortunately, right before that, Thundarr the Barbarian had already ended its run, 24 episodes in between 1980 and 1982, and couldn't quite capitalize on that sweet action figure profit. Or at least it couldn't up until, curiously enough, the year of 2004, when an actual show-inspired toy line was produced. 2 decades too late, I might add. Anyhow, other than being the direct ancestor to Filmation's He-Man, Thundarr the Barbarian is the kind of show that serves as an ideal pop-cultural mashup that best represents the very specific period of time in which it came out, by wearing its obvious inspirations on the proverbial sleeve. That is especially on point once you get a marginal look at the 3 main characters. A blonde Chosen One protagonist with a literal lightsaber,
His fabulous son's sword,
a sassy non-specific princess that's mostly useful and only occasionally gets kidnapped,
Come out wherever you are! Thunder!
and Chewbacca. No, seriously, show's creator Steve Gerber was forced by the NBC network to add a Wookiee-like character in the series because Star Wars was popular. As for the plot itself,
the year 1994. From out of space comes a runaway planet, hurtling between the Earth and the Moon. Man's civilization is cast in ruin. 2,000 years later, Earth is reborn, but one man bursts his bonds to fight for justice.
A post-apocalyptic high-fantasy science fiction hybrid with anthropomorphic animals, enslaved humans, and a blonde warrior supermodel rising to liberate mankind. Where have I heard that before? It's Kamandi. It literally just is the premise of Kamandi, the last boy on Earth. They aren't even trying to hide it, are they? Legendary comic book artist and writer Jack Kirby, who made Kamandi, by the way, worked on the production design of the show, so it cannot be just a coincidence. Now, to be fair, I mentioned how Thundarr, etc., has a tendency to wear its pop cultural references like a model on a catwalk. According to the official wiki article, the cartoon drew major inspirations from the likes of Conan the Barbarian, which is showing, Flash Garden, and Thor. Kamandi itself comes off as a mashup of different genres, styles, pulp comics, and also, very obviously, Planet of the Apes. Therefore, even though the show is openly derivative beyond the expected levels of derivativeness that all fiction has, it still manages to be charming and creative in its own right. For example, the very idea of placing the post-apocalyptic element of its digesis not just on the foreground of the aesthetic presentation, but as the epicenter of the narrative as a whole, it's something that not even thematically bold modern-day cartoon have the guts to fully embrace. Every episode showcases a different remnant of our civilization that only serves to remind the young audience about the millions of people who died in the Great Cataclysm. In that sense, the beautifully hand-drawn backgrounds do a great job in conveying a feeling of desolation alternated with the more colorful palette from the fantasy aspect of this science fantasy opus. On top of that, there is an intriguing, albeit terribly underdeveloped, element of sorcery mixed in with super science that grants a unique feel to the show. Do all these cosmetically pleasing choices make up for a series built around a main character that looks like a fusion between Luke Skywalker and Yor, the hunter from the future?
All of you, draw closer. I'll show you a wonder of wonders.
I've hinted this before, but for all the ambition that this diegesis exudes, there are just as many problems to be found in the execution, which is not surprising, again, considering the time period. No. That's way too easy. A typical episode of Thundarr opens up with our intrepid weekly saviors of humanity accidentally stumbling upon the plot, usually involving some magical MacGuffin or the wreckaged remains of something that existed back in the 20th century, with Dupe Skywalker charging blindly towards the danger while swatting his sword around as if he was trying to distract a cat, Princess Ariel phoning in the obligatory pun,
Looks like it's up to me to blaze the trail.
Occasionally forgetting that she's supposed to be a powerful sorcerer whenever it's dramatically convenient, and not Chewbacca growling and generally looking bemused the entire time. Unfortunately, that's really all you need to know about this character's personality, or tragic lack thereof, as there is little to nothing else happening in between the many action scenes throughout the show. Having an action-oriented cartoon in 1980 has to be considered an extremely bold move, considering Ruby Spears Productions did not have the budget to pull it off, and it shows every step of the way.
Someone, something is coming.
I'm firing my laser! There are well-known shortcuts to animate these types of sequences that old-school anime made famous, such as super quick zooming and panning of still images with dynamic lines of movement, or just skipping frames. The shortcuts they ended up using here, on the other hand, didn't work very well. They relied too heavily on painfully obvious reused clips and bare minimum animation cycles, thus dooming the cartoon at its very core. It's a shame really, considering it had surprisingly creative ideas that could rival the best episodes of classic Star Trek and Doctor Who. Case in point, the villain from the first episode ends up bringing to life the Statue of Freaking Liberty to literally squash every human alive! An allegory for the corruption of democracy and the American dream? In a children's cartoon from the 1980s? You have got to respect that at the very least. Perhaps I should make this as clear as possible. In spite of its problems, all derived by the limitations imposed by the time period by the way, this is an entertaining show. And not just for the obvious reasons that most cartoons from this decade could be considered entertaining. It was creative, it was bold, it pushed the boundaries of what Saturday morning's lineups could offer to their young audience, and for better or for worse, it paved the way for much more known and successful programs that would take the 80s by storm. Sure, it looks stylistically quaint by today's standards, and its episode-by-episode narrative formula of
find conflict, fight bad guys, save humanity
gets old and repetitive real fast, but honestly, Ruby Spears Productions did the best they could with the means they had.
Thundarr the Barbarian
might have been a product of its era, but in a period of time dominated by terrible animated adaptations of live-action TV shows, Scooby-Doo clones, and a veritable bankruptcy of new ideas, it was easily the best product of said era.
All of you, draw closer. I'll show you a wonder of wonders.
Yeah, this is still ridiculous though.
Can you handle the ship, Oogla?
I would like to redirect your attention to this curiosity from 1978 by Sanrio Entertainment, which is the Japanese company you might be familiar for Hello Kitty, let's face it, and probably, maybe, perhaps Aggressive Retsuko? And let's face it, not much of anything else. But back in the day, specifically 1970 and 1980-ish, it was a company mostly known for producing short animated features, such as the 4 animated adaptations of Unico by Osamu Tezuka. And this film that I wanted you to be curious about is titled Ringing Bell, and like I said, is from 1978. And the first thing you might be noticing immediately is that the main character, Shirin, looks suspiciously a lot like Unico, which again does not surprise me. The first Unico animation would be out in 1979, and much like Unico, there are a lot of commonalities in between these two, in that they have a tendency of lure you in with the promise of cute little animals to spend your time with, and then you have these cute little animals being subjected to really horrible things. To be specific, Unico, which is simultaneously the most obscure but also the most deceptively dark IP by a legendary manga artist Osamu Tezuka, was really a cosmically pessimistic take on the human condition, the inevitability of life, death and rebirth, and basically all a huge allegory about death. And the Ringing Bell is similar in that regard, but instead of looking at the human condition on a cosmic perspective, it looks at it in a more grounded perspective. It's about the cruelty of life, of the laws of nature, if you will, the death of innocence in the face of the uncaring nature of the world. And such is what happens to the main character. He witnesses his mother being killed by a wolf, and his heart's hardened because of that. He goes after the wolf for revenge, realizes he cannot get revenge because he's nothing but a weak sheep, so he makes the decision of not being a sheep and pursues the ideal strength of the wolf, even going so far as begging the wolf that killed his mother to turn him into his student. And I won't say any more about that, especially since it's just a 45 minutes long animated feature, an OVA, basically. It tackles important issues and philosophical questions about, again, the nature of the world and life, and the blind pursuit of strength. And the film really showcases this idiosyncrasy and its awful consequences in a very effective manner. It's an allegorically profound film, which is definitely something interesting to witness, but if I had to be honest, the most striking aspect of it remains the animation. Sanrio Entertainment was known for putting out quality animations at the time, and really just showing you the various movements and motions of the main character as he prances around and discovers the world, as he is created out of the ether, of the innocence that is imbued in. And then, even better than that, when we have the scene in which he realizes the death of his mother, which is honestly, thanks to a combination of the animation, the soundtrack, and the excellent performance of the Japanese voice actress, really comes as a whole as the most emotionally effective scene of this particular type. There are a few animation errors here and there, and sometimes, well, to be honest, half the times, the animals are talking without actually moving their mouths, which is something that I like to call the last unicorn syndrome, if you will. But other than that, this is a really interesting film that needs to be seen because it's definitely different from anything else you might see, both at the time and coming from Japan specifically. Honestly, there was never a better period for Japanese animation than the 70s and the 80s as far as experimentation and techniques were concerned. Really, those are little unknown treasures that deserve to be well, treasured. So check it out, Ringing Bell. It's not for the faint of hearts. It definitely isn't. Well, this has been a bit of Madhog's unscripted reviewing fun. I hope to keep you entertained during your weekdays. And thank you for listening, so see you next time.
Mega CD 究極兵器メタルソニック最速にして最強のライバル出現がソニックを熱く過激にする過去へ未来へ超音速アクションは時空をも超えたSonic the Hedgehog CD from Mega CD
You all remember Sonic CD, right? That legendary entry in the Sonic franchise that single-handedly made people buy that atrocious waste of space that was the first Sega Genesis add-on? You know, that glorified magnet for angry fanboys in which you could play Night Trap on and pretend you were actually spying, maybe half naked if you really squint your eyes, ladies? Yes, that is what you bought in order to play Sonic the Hedgehog CD. And why wouldn't you want to play such a classic? It had everything a true fan could possibly wish from his parents' money to get. High speed, slightly better than normal graphics,
Blast processor!
nightmarishly confusing level design, you name it. If you were one of the lucky people who could get their hands on the Sega CD, then you could have not afforded to miss out on this. I mean, what else were you going to play on that blasted apparatus? Lunar Eternal Blue? Police! Get a life already! Well, I personally don't know too much about the main selling point of a doomed business trend, other that I cannot play it to save my life. However, I do enjoy a very specific aspect of it. Care to guess? Well then, here's a bit of background for the game itself. So sometime after the release of the original title, Yuji Naka, credited father of the Blue Blur, tired of Sega's rigid working policies, moved to the then greener pastures of the United States along with several members of the Sonic team in order to develop Sonic the Hedgehog 2 under his own rules. It's befuddling to think what Japanese game developers could get away with at the time, considering what goes on nowadays. What was originally meant to be as the official sequel to the company's newfound money-making franchise ended up becoming a Sega CD exclusive game handled by a different team led by Naoto Oshima, the character designer for Sonic and Dr. Eggman. Now, we get to the part that interests me the most. The various traditionally animated cutscenes, including the object of this review, were produced by a legendary studio, Toei Animation, maker of a few TV series such as Sally the Witch, Cyborg 009, Tiger Mask, Heidi, Calimero, Devilman, all the Mazinger series, Cutie Honey, all the Robo series, that Astro Boy ripoff, Steel Jig,
Captain freaking Arlock,
Galaxy Express 999, Voltron, Dr. Slump, Japanese Transformers, Saint Seiya, Fist of the North Star, the whole freaking entirety of Dragon Ball, the whole Make It Stop Already Sailor Moon franchise, Slam Dunk, One Piece to this very day, the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, the complete Doremi series, the entire Please Kill Me Digimon series, oh god, there's more! Saikano, Zatch Bell, Bobo, Ultimate Muscle, the whole Pretty Precure series, Powerpuff Girls Z, Toriko, and finally, World Trigger. This, among many others. And then, of course, there are the theatrical releases, such as Sayuki. Look it up yourself! You get the idea. Toei is a big deal, and the overall quality of this animation definitely shows what they're capable of. Just take a look at the fluid motion of the character as he runs, jumps, hurtles from point A to point B. It's a constant movement that doesn't waste any frame, it doesn't use any shortcuts. A proper full motion animation, in other words, that makes creative use of the Hedgehog's abilities in relation to the gorgeously hand-drawn environment he is interacting with. By all accounts, this looks and feels like an expensive, high-budget sequence handled by really talented artists and animators. Speaking of the environment and how beautiful it looks, it is presented in such a way that it fits the character's very specific skills, and vice versa, thus making for a kind of terrain that would be considered impossible to traverse by any other means. Visually provided world building at its finest. Finally, the soundtrack, or rather, soundtracks. Notoriously, there were two songs made for that intro. Sonic Boom, as you're listening to right now, was reserved for the North American release of the game. Now, the other one...
You can go again. Don't fall behind. Say don't be late. Destination heaven. Stay alive. Now you and me. We're going to have fun. Say, lights off.
Was reserved for the Japanese, European, and Australian releases. Let's begin with the latter. Sonic, You Can Do Anything, sung in beautiful English, was composed by Naofumi Ataya and Masafumi Ogata, who already worked together for the 8-bit version of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and pretty much wrote all the music for this game as well. Now, interestingly enough, the American version had the almost entirety of said music being rewritten and recomposed by artists Spencer Nilsson, David Young, and Mark Crew, including Sonic Boom, which was performed by the group Pastiche. So, which song is better, you might be asking? Well, personally I prefer the American one, on the basis that English-sounding vocals are grating to listen to, but that does not necessarily mean that the song is bad, mind you. In fact, I would argue Sonic You Can Do Anything, with its unruly instrumentation and singing that goes all over the place, is a perfect fit for Sonic the character and his own rebellious, uncontrollable personality of running for the sake of running, while Sonic Boom, with its more serious and straightforward tone, does provide a sense of narrative focus and urgency that better fits Sonic the game, which is all about having an objective and reaching a goal. Ultimately, they are both right choices that create two very different moods, one lighthearted and fun, the other more focused and with actual gravitas. It doesn't matter which version you prefer, there is still no denying that the animated intro for Sonic the Hedgehog CD is the best animated intro in gaming history, let alone a perfect summarization of everything this franchise meant to its then adoring fans, before the inevitable decline. Sonic is all about speed, colorful levels, and saving the day from Death Star-looking doomsday devices. Apparently. I, for one, would love to see an actual film animated in this style. That doesn't count! So, that was my review of the glorious Sonic CD opener. I hope you enjoyed this belated Christmas gift to us. I sincerely wish both you and everyone else watching this a happy 2017. I have no additional snarky remark to add here, by the way. Let's just hope it's a better year altogether. Jeez. Yeah, so gotta end this video fast. See you.
Oh, the world owes me a lemon. Diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle-diddle.
Kaiba is an oddity, to say the least. It's a surreal journey, often veering towards pure dreamlike abstractism that tries, and ultimately fails, to tell a coherent narrative in spite of itself. When it comes to quality and variety in their lineup, very few Japanese animation studios can compare to Madhouse, the company that brought Satoshi Kon's world to the limelight, as well as the most visually rich and well-animated shows in general. And when it comes to a creative style, very few animators can compare to Masaki Yuasa. His vision is wild, unbridled, fluid and extroverted, to an almost transcendental degree. There are character animations done with a fixed model to work with, and then there is the complete antithesis that reviles such ruffian concepts and goes ballistic in the name of animated anarchy. Yuasa's style definitely steers towards that rebellious nature, as much as the budget will consent, ironically, making him one of the most recognizable and unique artists of his kind in the otherwise bloated anime scene. Couple his visionary ideas with Madhouse's monetary support, and the end result will be nothing short of eye-meltingly gorgeous. In that regard, Kaiba is one of the greatest artistic achievements of the past decade, an all-around masterpiece in terms of aesthetic presentation. Both the symbolically charged landscapes and the characters inhabiting this universe are vibrant and colorful, fully capable to convey essential information and feelings through their motions and interactions. The obviously deeply researched character design by by Nobutake Ito, is inspired by post-war Showa period animations from the likes of Osamu Tezuka and his pioneering generation, featuring those kinds of Western cartoon-inspired grotesque figures and disproportioned body types that dominated the first few years of Japanimation before a more realistic style took over in the 70s. To me personally, this grants the show with an immense nostalgic charm, as many of the anime I grew up with had characters drawn in such a way. I can never emphasize enough how great this show looks, and how powerfully its themes are conveyed through the animation.
Hickey?
Speaking of theming, the premise is actually surprisingly conventional given the presentation. This is a universe where memories can either be copied or extracted from bodies to be transferred into others, thus allowing those who can actually afford such inevitably expensive treatments to live on forever. Like I said, this isn't the first time science fiction tackles this idea as a means to comment on social stratification, self-identity, mental memories versus physical memories, the ever-present question of what it means to be human, and it most certainly wouldn't be the last. It feels like every major sci-fi/cyberpunk story made in Japan has to bring up these very specific topics ever since Ghost in the Shell became an omnipresent benchmark for rhetorical storytelling. However, the execution of such themes through the fantastical visuals of the show that intrinsically refuse any notion of sterile conventions makes them fresh and interesting. The first few episodes revolve around an amnesiac protagonist, the only time this cliché is actually appropriate, journeying through the galaxy, from planet to planet, serving as the audience proxy as he is exposed to various facets of human behavior in a way that might be inspired from The Little Prince. Which also reminds me of my favorite anime of all time, Kino's Journey, a criminally underrated gem by the way. What's interesting about this scenario is that the boy in question ends up having his mind transferred into various other bodies, most prominently the body of a girl by the name of Chronico, whose memories were literally left to float away in space. This does eventually lead to an episode that explores the concept of gender identity and why it is ultimately determined by one's own perception rather than by one's own anatomy. I won't say more about that other than it somehow features a tactful portrayal of menstruation as well as a girl trapped in the body of a muscular Native American stereotype with Bomberman hands. Speaking of bizarre imagery, in the second episode, a woman copies her memories inside the main character's body to have transcendental sex with it, which caused her to literally explode in the ecstasy of the climax. The fact that I had to type all of that makes me glad to be alive. Kaiba is a bizarre but endlessly fascinating little gem of high-quality animation, with genuinely dark and sad moments empowered by its thematic exploration, visual prowess, great soundtrack, and one beautiful opening. Unfortunately, all of that goes out the window once the real plot kicks in around episode 8, with plenty of clunky expositions, nonsensical revelations, betrayals and twists that don't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things, essentially turning into every bad sci-fi romance drama ever made. Because yes, this is a sci-fi romance drama, in case I didn't mention it. It doesn't help that the dramatic revelations concerning the two romantic leads were played out before the episode that actually established their relationship in the first place, making the supposed tragedy of the moment completely ineffectual from an audience's standpoint. It's a shame to see all that potential, all that hard work being squandered for a disappointing, rushed-out resolution that only serves to remind me of how great the first few episodes were in comparison. In any case, I would still recommend watching this anime for its merits, namely for being one of the most unique looking shows you will most likely lay your eyes on in the course of your entire lifespan, and I dare you to prove me wrong. I mean, come on, it's like Paprika meets Astro Boy. What's not to like about that? This has been Madhog the Master, and I'll see you out there somewhere. If there ever was the need to cater to a very specific niche of the gaming audience wanting to see cartoon animals piloting disproportionate steampunk-themed mechas with grubby limbs that grab things in a grubby, throwy way, Tail Concerto had it all covered. Produced by Namco Bandai and released in 1998 for the original PlayStation, the game was the first effort by CyberConnect 2, which would go on to make a significant splash in the market with titles such as Silent Bomber, Asura's Wrath, and a bunch of other titles no one cares about. Naturally, with a title like Tail Concerto, one would be inclined to assume it's a game about an unstable cat lady with delusions of grandeur trying to conduct an impromptu feline orchestra in an effort to recreate Toby Fox's Megalovania with the sound of cattails smacking onto each other. Or maybe that's just me? Instead, the world depicted in the game, and in the eventual sequels, is more akin to an episode of Tailspin viewed under the influence of 1970s anime, if 1970s anime could be consumed like LSD, which is a very roundabout way of saying it's an inherently interesting and creative idea that gets progressively more baffling the longer you think about it. It's about an anthropomorphic dog-like creature awkwardly meandering about in a silly-looking robot fighting and defeating enemies by way of pick-up and launch-based mechanics. It was the style at the time. Keeping up with the motif of bewildering video game titles, Solatorobo Red the Hunter was the 2010's sequel/spin-off of the original Megalotailovania Feline Orchestra in Concerto? Why did I think this was funny? Released a good 12 years after the first game as a Nintendo DS exclusive, Solatorobo Nel of Arciel tells a completely new story with different characters that only marginally connects to the previous iteration. This time, we feel the potentially flea-ridden shoes of generic DeviantArt Fursona number 387 as he travels around a steampunk-themed skyscape of floating citadels aboard his trusty battle mecha. His actual name is Red Savarin, and he's here to kick some tail, chew bone-shaped treats, and hopefully get a mercenary job that pays. He also has a younger sister by the totally real name of Chocolat Gelato. Because why not? During the process of failing a secret document retrieval mission inside a very unfortunately named flying vessel, he stumbles upon Elle, an androgynous cat girl that he hilariously mistakes for a boy, only to hilariously discover she's indeed female in the most hilarious way possible, through a combination of happenstance, misunderstanding, and a hot shower scene, which is apparently hilarious. My patience towards the worst and most obstinate tropes from Japanese media wears thinner and thinner as the years go by. Our hairy protagonist gets a hold of a mysterious medallion of great importance that quite mysteriously activates his obligatory latent powers once in his paws. Naturally, before you could cry "Kyubey!" from the top of your lungs. This script is a bit dated, isn't it? Elle proposes him to make a contract with her in exchange of an untold amount of riches. The kind of riches that almost certainly does not actually exist. In the typical conventions of this narrative style, Furball Mackenzie has to find the 3 MacGuffin stones of world-dooming prophecy before the customary group of incompetent evil bad guys gets in on that action. There also appears to be some sort of rejected Kingdom Hearts secret boss hanging in the area, but I'm pretty sure that has nothing to do with anything, especially not that suspicious plot-related medallion in Red's pockets. Cough. On a side note, judging by various arbitrarily recorded audio files you could hear whenever engaged in characters' dialogue, everyone in the world seems to either be speaking French or a reasonable French facsimile performed by painfully obvious non-French voice actors. That is, except for the occasional Japanese word getting thrown out there whenever Red's little sister had to say something that I may or may not have intentionally ignored. Now, let us talk about gameplay. Solatorobo Skies of Arcadia is technically an action role-playing game in the sense that it has extremely basic experience points and leveling up mechanics, hence barely qualifying as one. Given the hardware limitations of the handheld system, there is no sandbox-style overworld exploration to be had. Red can travel from a fixed location to the next with his ship and walk around the cities and dungeons aboard his personal robot, although he can descend from it in order to open treasure chests and retrieve semi-hidden but not really collectibles. As mentioned before, the core gameplay element revolves on the mecha's ability to grab objects or enemies and violently throw them in the general direction of their ultimate demise. The storytelling has a linear pace, but you are free to slightly deviate from said path by partaking in side quests available to you from quest brokers in any of the places you visit. Their successful completion will reward you with money, mission ranks to access even more quests, and experience points. Assignments can go from pirate thwarting ventures to time-based shenanigans that nobody likes, to fighting in tournaments and so on. Needless to say, it becomes repetitive after a while. Leveling up is a minor focus in the gameplay, since it will only slightly increase your health bar, while other physical power augmentations can be achieved by customizing Red's RoboPal with additional components available from shops and by utilizing spirit crystals to create more space to allocate said components, which is a mini-game all unto itself. Of course, the fact that the game tends to be unchallenging won't demand a great deal of effort from your part, or at least not in its first 10 hours or so. All jokes considered, there is nothing fundamentally wrong with Solatorobo, Sins of Our Fathers, aside from a seemingly inexistent level of difficulty, bare-bones characterizations, and a few wincing dialogue lines. In fact, I dare say that Solatorobo, The Red Among Us, was and still remains one of my favorite DS titles to this day. The reason for that, however, has less to do with the game itself and more to do with the far more fascinating themes that are explored once the real plot finally gets going in the second half, more or less at the same time in which this furry mecha hybrid anime pretender with little to no substance effectively turns into an utterly insane crossover between the Saturday morning Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon and a less narrow-minded version of Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, sans all the penis metaphors, that is. After dealing with the less than stellar first-round villains, actual superpowered human-like creatures commandeered by the real antagonist of this game, Dr. Gendo Robotnik, not his actual name, decide to show up and start wrecking the proverbial dog residue out of the entire IRL furry fandom in the name of apocalyptic accelerationism. Also, Furball Mackenzie can now turn into a human too, and potentially lose his mind to the irrational need to follow a very specific order given to him by some interdimensional weapon of mass destruction that's supposed to be a representation of hell and the end of days, and also happens to look like the Death Star, because why not? By the way, do not be alarmed by all of these spoilers. The cover art of the games box, as well as the 2 animated opening sequences included in the game, do a fine job in spoiling all the most important twists for your begrudging enjoyment. At this point in the story, Solatorobo 3 and Knuckles begins to demonstrate a lot of potential with its themes relating to humanity's path towards its inevitable self-destruction. It all turns out to be a cautionary tale about the negative consequences of technological arrogance, blind progress, resource depletion, and war that barely manages not to be as heavy-handed as I just made it sound right now. Red and his compatriots are, by all intents and purposes, the descendants of mankind, and, by banding together to fight against the threat of extinction, they are able to prove their worth as a species, thus finally learning from past mistakes. In other words, this is exactly like my Sonic the Hedgehog fanfiction! Well, it's a bit better, but let me have this, come on. Let me have this. Solatorobo Wars Episode 7 The Four Awakens might have its problems, but the sheer insanity of its premise and the universally understandable and topical message it delivers make for a memorable experience, at the very least. The character design was done by Takayuki Isobe of .ac Curriculum, and the introductory sequences were realized by acclaimed animation studio Madhouse. This is all to say, it's a game with some pedigree. In conclusion, you definitely don't need to be a furry to enjoy this. But it helps. So, you've reached the end of the video. Well, the scripted part of the video at the very least. And oh boy, what a script it was! You might have noticed that some of its references or its humor might feel a bit dated. That's because I had this particular script hanging around for a while. I've been meaning to make a video review of this particular video game for some time, but I've always put it off, and now, well, I couldn't be bothered to rewrite this script in its entirety, and I thought it still worked for the most part. There are a few elements that I have omitted from this review. For example, there are several scenes in which Red interacts with an openly, explicitly gay character that flirts with him, and he reacts exactly in the way you might expect him to react in a Japanese game from 2010. Because, again, annoying, terrible, lazy tropes. Also, that point after the shower scene when he starts spouting gender essentialist rhetoric about how girls and boys should act. Oof, that has not aged well. And there's a car outside. Well, that's lovely. What was I saying? Something about this game. Oh, right. This game has a couple of problematic elements to it that have not aged well, because of course they have not, but all the while, do not take all the snark that I channeled through this review to heart. This game actually means a lot to me. It came out just at the right time for me. It is a piece of nostalgia by now, because it's been, well, 11 years since its original release. And that's something. Also, some of you might have noticed that CyberConnect 2 this year was celebrating its 25th anniversary into this business since its inception. And they celebrated this occurrence by releasing their newest title, which is the long-awaited yet sadly very unexpected new game into the so-called Tail Bronx series. For context, the same series that Tail Concerto and Solatorobo, Sins of Arcadia Among Us, or whatever the title was supposed to be. Get it? Silly titles, I make fun. So, we have a third game in this series. Well, technically a fourth one, because there was a mobile title that lasted for a while. It was a Japanese exclusive, and nobody knows about it, so we're not talking about that. The last game they have just released, as of this August in fact, is Fuga Melodies of Steel, and it's technically a prequel to the whole story in Solatorobo and Tail Concerto. And it's a very different game from what you would expect it to be. It is not a happy-go-lucky action mecha adventure. It does have customization, but it's actually a very linear, turn-based strategy RPG. And it reminds me a lot of Darkest Dungeon, if Darkest Dungeon was, again, very linear, very streamlined, very short, and much easier. I love this game. That's the short of it. That's the long and short of it. I love this game, and I really want people to buy this. I want people to buy this just so we can get more games from this series made by these people. And I'm not sponsored by CyberConnect 2, I wish I were, but I don't need to be sponsored by them to tell you, please buy this game, buy it, buy it, buy it, buy it right now. If there is any chance whatsoever to see titles such as Tail Concerto and Solatorobo being remastered and become widely available in today's market, that is your chance, because you might get your hands on Tail Concerto through not quite legitimate means, but Solatorobo, you're not going to get Solatorobo anytime soon. It's a title for the Nintendo DS from 11 years ago. And from what I understand, it is quite expensive, should you actually find a copy on eBay. It's very rare, and really the only way for you to play it right now would be, again, through less than legitimate means, if you know how to run a Nintendo DS emulator. So that should be fun for you to figure out, hence why, for accessibility means, I want you to make Fuga Melodies of Steel a success. I want this game to be successful, so that we may get the chance to see those older titles floating around again, and hopefully to see more titles in the future from this very same developer about this very same very fascinating universe of cat and dog furries and robots and tanks and everything in between. Fantasy, action, science fiction, adventure. It has everything, really. So yes, buy Fuga Melodies of Steel. That's my message for you. Now, with that all aside, let's have a bit of a real talk, shall we? You probably have read the title of this video. It's a series finale of sorts. I am not announcing my retirement from YouTube activity or from making videos. Mind you, I still do that because I enjoy doing that. But this latest video, the video you're seeing right now, that's going to be my last written video review in this particular format for the foreseeable future. If you've been following me for a long time, then you must remember that the last time I did a written review, a video review in that traditional style, well, that happened a few years ago. I don't even remember when exactly, that's how long ago it was. I have drifted away from that old particular output and just decided to just do whatever the heck I pleased, and as a result, all the content you see from my channel right now is either podcasts or let's plays or weird hybrids of the two. And I'm fine with doing that. I much prefer having the opportunity to have a free-form discussion with my pals, or with you right now, as I am doing on this blurb, very long end blurb that's going to be longer than the actual written part. I am all burnt out on the old written video review format. At some point in my life I realized, much like most people ever on YouTube, that I could not make a career out of making funny video reviews of things I like or dislike, which was the whole intent behind the serious master presentations. And so I decided that I was going to do one last video in this series to end it on a high note of sorts, and that was going to be it. That one video was going to be about Solatorobo, because I care about this game. It means a lot to me, as I already established. I had a script already prepared for it. I was not really in the mood to write a whole new script. So I just went and did it. You know, like a murder, I just went up and did it. With little pre-plan. And I hope you enjoyed it too. But that's going to be it. Now, I know what you might be asking to me. Again, if you're a long-time follower of this channel. Madhog, why? Oh, why did you review a video game in your film and animation show? Well, that's because I had a show for reviewing video games. It was called The Dream Traveler, Klonoa reference, by the way. Sad that I never did review Klonoa, come to think of it, but oh well. I've already retired that a long time ago. In fact, I retired that one on a significant high note. On a sort of review/out loud gushing of the game Undertale in 2015. I could not think of a better way to retire a show that I was not passionate about anymore. So, for lack of a better alternative, I decided to just review Solatorobo in the format of master presentations. Even though it's not film, it's not cinema, it's not television. But at least it has animation in it, by Studio Madhouse, so that technically counts. And what, let me just say, what a great animated opening this game has. Not just for the time, but in general, it's one of the best ever. The music is inspiring, inspirational, and dramatic. The animation is also all of those things, and funny too. The art direction of the game in general, of Solatorobo, is fan-freaking-tastic. Especially for the hardware limits of the Nintendo DS, which I'm sure this game was pushing, and it runs really well in spite of that on the handheld system. Darn good character design too. I just really like this game, and I hope that I've managed to convey that to you in a sufficient manner, in spite of all the jokes and joshing of that video review. I cannot believe I left that Madoka Magica reference in it. Megalotalovania? Concerto of Felines or something along those lines. That's me legitimately asking, why did I think this was funny? Why did I left it in? I don't know. Why do people do things? Why do people wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to do something funny today? It's not funny then. Oh well, hopefully you'll get a laugh or two. To summarize the shambling approximation of a post-video blurb that this was supposed to be, for your convenience, I'm retiring Master Presentations, my supposedly long-term video review series, because I'm not passionate about that anymore. I don't want to do reviews in that format anymore. I prefer podcasting with my friends, as you might have noticed. And that's exactly the kind of content you will expect and must expect from this channel from here on out. Which is the same content, le content, it's French you see, that you've seen from this channel for the past few years anyway, so nothing really will change for you in any significant manner. Expect the usual dramatis lectio whenever we do one of those, our read/riff fanfiction show. Expect the usual Mad Play podcast, which is our hybrid between Let's Play and podcasting, as the title implies. And who knows, you might get some new classic Mad Play series in the future when we do regular Let's Play, but every video that I post on this, save for the occasional once in a blue moon exception, is going to be just a collaborative effort between me and my many mates of Team Yume. Because that's what I like to do nowadays on the internet. I like to engage in group activities with my fellow internetians. With my fellow Kaninu and Felinekos on the internet. There! I did a reference thing. I'm not cutting any of this, by the way. If I am cutting anything from this, it's going to be very little, but as of now, this is where we part ways. This is the end of an era, as you might want to put it. I don't want it to be sad. I don't want it to be some sort of depressing eulogy. Rather, I want to celebrate that this era, this particular slice of my life is done, not coming back to it. And, well, the writing was on the wall already, but now you have auditory confirmation from moi that that particular era is finished. And I don't really have much to add to all that. That's how things are. It is what it is. Master Presentations is officially now retired. Who knows what new ventures will come along my way. You have to realize that YouTube is not a career for you. It barely qualifies as a hobby. Something to do with friends. I don't post videos as often as I used to because, once again, I'm all burnt out. And this is the state of things. And this is where I say goodbye. Thank you for joining me on this ride. Oh, what the heck! We cannot end it like that, on such a dour note. Let us bring things up a bit, shall we? This is all very off the cuff, really. I'm not even using my microphone. Yes, that is a sock. Anyway, I'm going to do you, yes, you, a brief showcase of some of my games in my collection. The most obscure ones, to be precise. Hey, look at this! It's a jade cocoon! I haven't seen one of those since the launch of the PlayStation 2! It is the most recent acquisition in my collection, isn't it? A Pokemon-style RPG that does its own thing, quite interestingly. What else do we have here? Well, of course, there's... we don't care about this, don't care about this, don't care about this. Klonoa! The remake for the Wii. You know, the one nobody ever played or even knew about. That one. I have it, of course I have it. It's the only reason to still have a Wii for me, so that I can play it. And this is... hold on. Shut up. And this is Klonoa 2, Lunatia's Veil, the sequel, which was also a launch title for the PlayStation 2. Good times to be had all around. Sorry about the lighting, that's the only light I can have. The light of day, that is. There's Shadow the Hedgehog. Speaking of Nintendo Wii, this is Fragile Dreams! Farewell, Ruins of the Moon. It's bad. It's terrible. But it's ultra rare, so... lucky me. Sakura Wars. So Long My Love, the only Sakura Wars released in the West, aside from the current last one. Ooh, what's this? It's Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. This means a lot to somebody who grew up with Tatsunoko animations. And that actually knows them, that is. Yeah. The Last Story, Super Mario Galaxy. The Nights into Dreams sequel. Oh, let's go to my Nintendo DS. Of course, there's Solatorobo. Oh, look at this. It's a ghost. It's a ghost trick. I have it and you don't. You most certainly don't. Let's see. Oh, this is the very rare Nintendo DS version of the first Disgaea game. Of course, you can get Disgaea pretty much anywhere nowadays, but this is a unique copy of a version that's very hard to find. You know, it's a collector's item, if you will. That is Dragon Quest IX, Ever Oasis, Animal Crossing. Don't care about this. Several Dragon Quest games. The Chrono Trigger version for the DS. Mario and Luigi. Final Fantasy. Ooh, indeed. Another code, 2 memories. Boy, I haven't touched this one in eons. First-person puzzle adventure game. Very rare indeed. It had a bad twist at the end. What else do we have here? Oh, there's a Game Boy Advance version. Well, only existing version of an Astro Boy game. But back to PlayStation 2. Ooh, I almost lost this one. La Pucielle Tactics, the precursor to the Disgaea series. Well, that about does it for my short presentation. I don't have that many games anymore, at least not in physical form, that is. But what I do have is pretty respectable, I would say. What a mess. Oh gosh, everything is falling apart. So, with that, I shall finally bid you adieu and thank you from the bottom of my... what's in the chest? Heart! From the bottom of my heart. Thank you for sticking with me all these years, if you have. If you have not, well, I hope you will stick with me somewhat with whatever it is I'm going to do in the foreseeable future. This has been Madhog Die Master, and I guess this is the end of the video. The entire video, that is. Good night. Mwah! Have a nice day.